Welcome back to The Price of Business. I am your host, Kevin Price, talking to you about you and your business after talking about how too many people are being thrown into jails in the United States. We're going to talk a little bit about a case that could be made for when they should be thrown in jails in the United States. And it's inspired by some articles I read about what the folks there in Iceland did following its banking crashes a few years ago. I wrote about this, by the way, at the Huffington Post. It's in the business section. Best way to find my articles at Huffington Post, and now there's a lot of them. Just go to Google and put in Kevin Price, Huffington Post. It'll go to that main page. Click that main page. You'll see it, what the U.S. could learn from Iceland. And Iceland let a bunch of banks fail entirely. A couple of banks they did nationalize, which I didn't like that, but they did do that. And then England bailed out some other banks. They apparently there's a lot of British interest in Iceland, which is interesting that there's any interest in Iceland, considering there's less than 500,000 people in that country. But apparently, several of them are of British origin. But in addition to that, what I thought was most interesting and most helpful from a long-term perspective is that they threw their butts in jail. These bankers who misbehaved, they treated them like criminals because the behavior was criminal behavior. Sigmund? Yeah,
and definitely I hear a lot from Occupy Wall Street people saying that we should be doing the same thing here in the United States because, you know, people at Goldman Sachs, people at all these different banking institutions are basically getting away with financial, fiscal, economic murder. And they're getting away with it because they've bought our politicians. And so, you know, they find it criminal the way that, of course, they blame Wall Street for everything. But, you know, there is some validity to that these bankers have really been acting not in the best interest of their customers, but in the best interest of themselves. And, you know, these guys get these huge salaries and huge bonuses even when they fail. And there's something going on.
Yeah, it's the epitome of crony capitalism. You know, what we're seeing happening here in these countries.
Right.
And I think there should be a lot more accountability in our country. You know, we have 90 million Americans who historically would have been working that are not working today. We have the largest population of non-working Americans, both numerically and percentage-wise, of any time in U.S. history since the Great Depression. Any time. That includes under Carter. And our recovery has produced half as many jobs than any recovery in modern economic history. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that investors and people in business and people who are involved in this economy sit there and they look at how nefarious these mega businesses acted. And there's an actual list of businesses that are essentially not allowed to fail. And they sit there and they look at that and they go, how can a country like this, you know, sustain itself long term with a business culture like that?
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the reason why this recovery has been so weak and why we only continue to limp along rather than enjoy anything robust.
Well, there definitely was some what should have been considered criminal activity. I mean, buying up the toxic assets, and they knew better. They knew that they were toxic, but
so-called derivatives,
and they went ahead and you know, just basically screwed over the rest of the people by doing that, by offloading them. And in a scrupulous environment, those people would be called on the carpet. But we don't live in a scrupulous environment, especially not when you have all these lobbyists in Congress who are spending millions and billions to have the law basically not applied to them.
Yeah.
And when you have Congress members not applying the law to themselves, you know, opting out, if you will, then there's definite malfeasance. And I can understand the Iceland government wanting to put those types of people behind bars.
Is that how you opt out? Is you become a congressman?
Yes.
To that scrutiny?
Absolutely.
See, people have encouraged me to run for Congress so many times over the years, and I told them there was no reason why I would want to. Now you finally give me a reason why. I mean, and there really isn't. You know, I believe that the book Parliament of Whores. What is his name? What is his name? Who wrote that book? One of my favorite books and one of my favorite writers.
But you're getting old, so you can't remember.
Exactly. Next thing you know, you're going to be rolling me up from the ground floor in this chair and just putting me right here.
Bringing back memories.
Bringing back memories of some former people that you've had on. And of course, I do remember, thanks to a computer, it was P.J. O'Rourke who wrote that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, there you go.
And they are. It's a Parliament of Whores. Who would want to be associated with such a group?
Yeah. Well...
And it's so funny they call
would,
themselves honorable, and they exchange conversation with each other.
And my friend, and that's why
honorable is an official part of their title, and it's like how ironic is that?
Right. Well, judges are the same way, and most of them are not necessarily honorable.
Oh no, most of them are oligarchical dictator types.
Yeah, and so it's just the society we live in. It's nomenclature. It's ridiculous. But one thing, interestingly, Hillary Clinton was a senator. Maybe that's why she thought she could get by with this email server stuff because she's used to having no scrutiny, But hey, Hillary, you forgot that you'd left the Senate and become the Secretary of State, and the rules apply differently.
Yeah, we actually have rules over here because, this crazy thing called national security that we're trying to protect.
Well, I haven't read your article yet. I want you to drill down a little bit because I find it fascinating what Iceland did and maybe how we could perhaps follow their model a little bit in dealing with these too big to fail entities.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept. What they did was awesome. Forbes reported that a country with a small population of roughly 320,000 citizens, Iceland's entire banking structure systematically failed in the early days of 2008 recession. Let's see, what else do we have here? That in order to get the country back on track, it pursued a course that was radically different from the rest of the world. While most countries allowed their financial institutes to stay in their sixth state or even replace one economic illness collapse with another, artificially propping them up.
Hello, yes, what we did.
Iceland chose to let its financial disease run the course, and the nation was certainly better off for its decision. The Forbes piece goes on to note that instead of allowing the criminals responsible for bank fraud to run free as the years passed by, Iceland thought it might be wise to actually indict bankers who committed serious financial crimes that contributed to the collapse. By paying off loans for consumers, forgiving homeowner debt, which I don't think is a great idea, but that's well.
Well, we're also in a country of 300 million versus 300,000.
Right, up to 110% of the property value, and throwing the offenders in prison. Iceland was able to bounce back. Now its economy is recovered and is growing faster than both the European and U.S. economies.
Yeah. Well, again, I mean...
Makes me feel warm all over, which you don't get that a lot from Iceland.
No, but when government is involved, economies of scale don't really apply, do they?
No, it doesn't.
I mean, people want to extrapolate that because we have a larger country, but we have a larger economy, that somehow our government can manage an economies of scale kind of a theorem and make things work that work in small countries. And it doesn't work like that because the larger our bureaucracy gets, the more waste, the more graft, the more corruption, the less efficient it is, not the more efficient. So while a business might be able to say economies of scale, here's how we do it, the government doesn't operate like that. We don't have the accountability that a corporation would have to operate like that. And so what you see in Iceland won't necessarily work here. That's my take on it.
No, I don't agree with that because it probably would have been more consequential because the rest of the world economy is dependent on the United States in a way. Obviously, Iceland is not. The world is not dependent on Iceland. It would have been probably more painful, certainly more consequential. But I think long-term wise, we would have had a more robust recovery once we got through.
Well, what I'm saying is we couldn't have done things like just written off everybody's mortgage.
Oh, no, we certainly couldn't have done that.
I mean, to follow those types of, that type of procedure here would have been, I mean, it was bad enough as it was because we did write off a lot of stuff. Yeah. There were a lot of people who were forgiven their debts, and that caused a great amount of consternation among, many conservatives, especially, who thought, hey, wait a second, there's got to be some individual responsibility here, too. You can't blame everything on the banks. You can't blame everything on DITEC and all these guys and nationwide mortgage lenders. some of it has to fall on the consumer who decided to take out a $500,000 loan when they only made $60,000 a year.
Mm-hmm.
And that's insane. And of course, Congress had a lot to do with it, with the Dodd-Frank, horrible legislation that in large part led to the corporations feeling the need to write loans, give loans out to people who really couldn't afford it.
Actually, Dodd-Frank was a result of all that. It came after 2008. Dodd-Frank came.
I'm sorry. So there was one before that led to that.
Yeah,
it was during the Clinton
I'm
era.
sure Dodd and Frank were both involved in that.
It was during the Clinton era.
Chairman's. Yes, that's exactly right.
And they basically started putting pressure. But I mean, Bush did it too. It was during his tenure too.
Oh yeah.
They put pressure on the banks to write loans so there would be great. And one of Bush's great achievements during his time in office, he said, was that home ownership was at the highest point ever in American
US
history.
Meaning a whole bunch of people who had no business owning a home had one.
Yeah, I was going to say, guess what that means.
Translation.
And now it's at the lowest.
Translation.
Now it's at the lowest in a long, long time.
Yeah. So right now in August, the average high is 57 degrees in Iceland. So like I said, very rarely is there any warm news, but that is warm news.
Well, I'm glad that they're doing better.
Is the range, the temperature range isn't as well as I thought. So like the average low in January is only 28. I think it would be lower than that. Wouldn't you think?
Well, in a place called Iceland, sure.
You would think.
But technically you can make ice at 28 degrees.
Yeah, but the average low, and the lowest ever is only 1 degree. I would think it'd be way lower.
Oh, we've had lower than that in Minnesota.
We've had lower than that here. No, not here. But yeah. But what's also interesting is right now the average hours of daylight is 19 hours right now in Iceland.
Oi.
Yeah, and in fact in June rather, it was 20 to 22 hours.
Oi.
Yeah, I know. I was in White Nights in
Moscow.
In higher St. Petersburg.
St. Petersburg.
Yeah,
I was going to say.
It was crazy, man. You never want to go to bed. Right. If you lived here, you figure out how to get used to it.
Well, you
but I
do.
never wanted to go to bed. It was driving me nuts.
Now you know how it feels to be in Vegas.
Yeah, I've been to
Vegas.
Vegas.
A casino.
Yeah,
they don't ever go to bed. They don't want you to. There are no clocks in any of the casinos because they don't want you to know how late it is and how long have you been there.
Yeah, I understand that. But, it's something about going outside at 12 at night.
Oh, dude, that's freaky.
It's pitch, it's bright.
Yeah.
It looks like noon.
Oh, yeah, it's freaky.
12, but it's the wrong 12.
But, it's also weird to have it the opposite way. Whereas when I lived in New York, at 4 in the afternoon, I'd leave my job, I'd walk outside.
Yeah.
And it's night. It's like midnight night.
Yeah, the last time
dark.
My wife and I went to New York for one of our trips. We love to go to New York. It's one of our favorite places to visit. We spent a week there in January. It was exactly like that, 4 o'clock.
Yeah.
And then if it weren't for artificial light, it would look like 8 o'clock anywhere else.
That's right. And so you're like, okay, I came in, this morning. It was nice and bright and sunny, and it's not really late. I'm walking outside, and it's time for bed. It's only 4:30, but it's time for bed.
As usual, you digress. So we're going to go ahead and call this segment done. We're going to stick a knife in it or a fork in it. It's a fork.
Yeah, you're getting violent over there, buddy.
All right, when we come back, much more for you. Do want to remind you, though, the best content here can be found over there at usdailyreview.com, and this is The Price of Business.